Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community. Plus a live Q&A that you can't find anywhere else. It's February 19th, 2025. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator for AWS infrastructure that helps teams deploy their software faster. And we do this by leveraging our 200 plus Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 100 million times. So if you or your team has been banging your head against the wall with Terraform, just head over to cloudposse.com/meet. Again, cloudposse.com/meet. Answer a few quick questions and you'll book a meeting with me directly. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is informal. You can engage as much as you'd like, ask questions. And for those on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Go to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours to register. So I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's session valuable, share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. You'll find a recording of today's session and our back catalog of all past episodes there. If you find something interesting, share it with them, spread the knowledge. All right, so here are the things that caught my attention over the past week. Just getting my things out of the way here. All right. So here's one. Pepe shared it with me, but also it was in the Anton's newsletter. Kind of interesting. Probably would have liked to see this a year ago, 6 months ago. We were actually thinking of doing something like this ourselves. So what is this? So this is a GitHub action that makes managing the versions of Terraform modules within a monorepo easier. And we at Cloud Posse have been running a monorepo for our Terraform components for a very long time. And we decided actually to change course entirely. So this was a monorepo with about 180 or so different Terraform root modules in it. And versioning in a monorepo is tricky. So this is a GitHub action that aims to make that easier. I think it solves some things, but I don't think it probably addresses all the issues that we had maybe with the monorepo approach. So it does produce a nice little release plan in Markdown, keeps the changelog up to date. And overall, I think it looks pretty nice, nicely documented and so forth. I'd be curious to understand what is their strategy for, if you're doing this, you're going to have to push I'm curious what their strategy is on two fronts. One is tagging. Is this using tagging or GitHub releases? And if so, it is definitely awkward to use the GitHub release strategy with individual artifacts in a monorepo, whether it's Terraform or anything else. I think the monorepo approach works really well if you have a separate delivery mechanism for your artifacts, maybe GitHub packages, for example, that's not supported by Terraform. A hosted Terraform registry with versioned artifacts, that works well. But using tags and using GitHub as your registry for artifacts is awkward for a monorepo. So let's see the tags, releases. Yeah. So it looks like it does maintain a map of the versions. Usually I've seen these things implemented with like a version file for each component within a monorepo. Matt, I just saw you on mute. Were you going to add anything before we move on?
I was just unmuting because I was double muted with I muted my microphone as well as on Zoom. So
Okay.
yeah. The only thing I was gonna say I did also though is that I did notice that they use conventional commit messages to calculate everything. So maybe that's a little bit easier to like deterministically figure out like if it should bump the next version and all of that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that's cool.
it's an interesting one.
I think I would have given it a shot or kicked the tires on it before ruling it out for sure. We've obviously moved in a totally different direction and no regrets.
Yeah, and you can see that it does say right there, the last bottom thing, that it's 100% GitHub based, that it doesn't, you don't need to store it anywhere else.
Mhm. Interesting, yeah. So it is ultimately using tags. All right. Then let's see what else we got here. This was really exciting. Didn't see this one coming. Michael brought this to our attention. Really exciting announcement for Mermaid. So Mermaid, if you're not familiar with it, is a very simple way to express charts and diagrams in a text-based manner. If you're familiar with like UML, it's in that camp. It's what's special about it though is that Mermaid is supported on GitHub. And if you use GitHub as an organization, then you can have very nice diagrams embedded in your documentation. And when you do diagrams as code, unlike diagrams that you do in like Lucidchart, they're always up to date. So you can PR the differences and make changes and understand visually what's going on with what's represented in the code. Now, the biggest problem was there was no support for icons. And it was harder to express certain things using Mermaid. What we actually ended up doing at Cloud Posse was hacking the generated SVGs to inject our own icons, but now looks like we don't need to do that anymore. So this is already available, I believe, on GitHub. You can access any of the 200,000 icons on icon design or Iconify. Yeah. So there's some 200,000 icons that are freely available on Iconify design, and you can now leverage those to enrich your diagrams. So good news for all of us, DevOps folks. Matt, what do you think?
I was just gonna say it also says that you can add your own custom icons too,
Oh yeah, good point.
which
Yeah,
is pretty cool.
yeah. I I wonder if that works with GitHub, but since that looks like you have to register when you initialize it. So if you use if you're using Mermaid on like your hosted Next.js site, like we are, then that would be possible to have custom icon sets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Next. So GitHub has been doing a lot of work around artifacts and attestations and connecting the two through GitHub. This is a evolution of that you can now have attestations on your artifacts on GitHub and verify them using the GitHub CLI command. We haven't had a chance to play around with this yet, but I think this would be really exciting to incorporate with some of the things that we're doing. This was something I was not searching out, but I just struggled, stumbled. As I was struggling, I stumbled upon it. It was a CLI for interacting with GitHub Actions. The GitHub CLI is quite feature rich, but this is obviously optimized specifically just for GitHub Actions and being able to retrigger jobs, and I'm not sure if you can view logs and so forth, but looked interesting. All the things that Charm Bracelet enables are these nice text-based UIs.
The other thing I was just going to mention is that the VS Code plugin for GitHub does a really good job of doing this as well. You can see like all of your running jobs and get logs and all of that kind of stuff right from within your IDE, whether it's VS Code or Cursor or whatever, but anything that supports VS Code plugins.
That is a good tip. And then, because I was looking at the issues on that project, I stumbled on this, which looks kind of interesting. Like, we haven't seen enough AI tools, and take it with a grain of salt. There's enough of these out there. This one is absolutely free, and is integrated with ChatGPT, OpenAI and Claude. And it can, based on an issue, automatically answer it if somebody opens an issue and it knows the answer, and it's context aware with the repository. So the way I came across it was I saw this comment in this other function, sorry, in this other project. How can I create a pat? And then here is the write-up from that GitHub action. I'm sure could use some prompt coaxing and have repository context file similar to what Copilot does to improve it. But maybe for busy repositories that get a lot of the same kinds of questions, maybe something like this would be helpful.
Just a clarification, it's not free. You have to provide your own OpenAI or Claude token in order to do that. So you have to pay for the model time, basically. But
the
I mean, action itself is
your
free.
account. It's using whatever. This is, yeah, assuming you already use OpenAI or Claude, you can just put in your token.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the frustrating things is, as all these services are adding support for AI, I got to pay for AI here. I got to pay for AI here. I got to pay for AI here. When, and I get it. Like, if that is the core functionality of what they're building, like, I understand that OpenAI and Claude are two totally separate systems, and paying for one or the other would make sense. But if they are in the end just wrapping OpenAI, why do I have to pay them to use the OpenAI I already pay for? That's my frustration, at least. All right, let's see. I think I'm running down to my last two more. This was trending on Reddit. Don't ask me why you would want to do this, but now you can say you can, at least. So you can now write functions in JavaScript that are called directly from within Terraform. Obviously, proof of concept. And I still don't know why you would want to do that, but somebody has proven the concept. This ties into the announcement that came last year, I believe, that Terraform providers can extend functions. Previously, data sources were often used kind of like functions. Now it has first-class support for functions in providers. Oh, let's see, next announcement. Last one was because we all know it sucks to upgrade Kubernetes, and many companies therefore do not. Enabling government inefficiency, Canonical announces 12-year LTS support on Kubernetes versions. So basically, if you cannot upgrade the cluster, you can at least have stable version guaranteed for 12 years. Pretty, yeah. There's clearly a demand for it, or they wouldn't come up with the service.
Yeah, this just seems like a really bad idea to me, but I understand that I understand that someone must want it if they're offering it as a service.
Well, hey, I'm only going to be at this company for the next 4 years. This is perfect. So I can push this off to somebody else's, tenure. And then when they reach the end of the next 8 years, then I can sell them that service to upgrade you from a 12-year-old Kubernetes cluster to a current, 2037 cluster.
And you have to do it version by version. So you know how many versions that will be
Yeah.
for 12 years old?
That's the next service that they're going to sell you.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
Kubernetes even 12 years old yet?
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Yeah,
guess
no,
it is, right?
what was the thing I was just surprised turned 10? Oh no, it was something much bigger. That open office just turned like 40 or something. I didn't know that it was, or LibreOffice. Yeah, this was on Hacker News. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea there was some open source software like that was still taken.
Yeah.
I think this came from Star Office, but I might be wrong,
Hmm,
which was commercial.
that is true. That could be, let's see, Star Writer, maybe, German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Star Rider. Yeah.
Well, that's all the
For,
announcements.
for what it's worth, Kubernetes was released June 7th, 2014. So it's not even 12 years old yet. And they're offering 12-year-old support for Kubernetes. So imagine if they had that from the beginning, someone could still be on those like crazy, ridiculous, ugly versions of Kubernetes that came out in the beginning.
Yeah. Which is what the current versions will feel like relative to what it's like in 12 years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what was in the chat here.
I I don't know. You mentioned something. I'm just gonna just quickly bring it up, but you mentioned something about like government inefficiencies or something like that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else had seen, but they published a distribution of the number of people by age group that are on the Social Security recipients list in the US now. They like have been digging into it, and there's something like, I don't know, several thousand people who are over like 130 years old that are collecting Social Security. So,
Ah,
and some that are like almost 200 years old. So,
what?
You gotta be
Vampires are
careful with that though. It's
people.
it's from it's the way the software works. Social Security doesn't track death dates. So if
yeah.
there isn't one, they set it to like 1860 or something. It's just a software issue. It has nothing to do with the
I,
people themselves or any of their data.
well, I've heard multiple accounts on that one. I'll just say, if that were the case, I would expect the numbers to be significantly higher than the numbers are, because there were like only a couple of people who were in that, like in a couple of certain buckets. So
Yeah, but
but
look into it. It's not that they actually think people are 150 years old. It's a function of how the software works, and it's not an issue.
Okay. I mean, I can't say that for a fact or not. I'll take your assertion at face value that's what your belief is. But I read a couple of things that seem to be saying that the systems were messed up too. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But my only point is that if they can't get basic things right, maybe maybe upgrading Kubernetes isn't something they should be doing all that often anyway.
The story I heard was it would cost $9 million to fix that, and they decided not to spend it, which seems fair to me.
That was just for 2 COBOL programmers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next topic was on Bake. Zach, you were asking if anyone's using it. I believe we've set one up to run multi-architecture builds of Atmos's Docker image, but I can't recall for certain.
I think it's pretty cool if they chose HCL, to do this. It's a pretty
Mm.
expressive declarative language. So
Do you remember early versions of GitHub Actions were in HCL, and at some point they switched to YAML?
all the people complaining not enough YAML.
Yeah,
I think,
can't make everyone happy.
yeah, I think Mitchell actually did the keynote announcement. Mitchell Hashimoto did the keynote announcement when they announced GitHub Actions, and he demonstrated it, and it was all HCL at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't remember that fact. Okay.
Actually, I have a fond, not so pleasant recollection of them using HCL to begin with, because I developed a whole course teaching people how to use GitHub Actions, like the initial versions or whatever. And then they flipped pretty quickly, maybe 9 or 10 months in. I forget how fast it was. But then I had to go back and redo everything almost immediately.
Yeah, that was annoying, I'm sure.
And
Yeah,
they prefer HCL over the YAML and JSON. I guess it supports both, but from my understanding, they do prefer HCL for its expressiveness in doing these big files. So
yeah, strikes a balance. I have a feeling like with obviously these are choices. One doesn't have to use everything that HCL supports. I feel at some point HCL stops looking like a configuration language and more just like really ugly code. And I'd prefer to use Perl in comparison when you start looking at how these crazy loops and things work in HCL.
yeah, expressive doesn't mean understandable. So I don't know. It's hard to read HCL. It really is. So
Complex HCL. As written
Yeah.
here, it looks really nice. I don't mind it at all, but that's not what it looks like in the end. Let's see.
way better than a bunch of Docker commands, though, no matter what. So
Yeah.
I mean, this almost looks like they just kind of like grabbed like Packer, like, or they borrowed heavily from Packer to kind of build this, right?
Or I'm thinking Waypoint by HashiCorp, which is, by the way, archived.
Did they get rid of it? Yeah.
Yeah, they turned it into
already gone.
they turned it into a strictly it's still around, but it's strictly a SaaS product from HashiCorp. But where do they have an examples folder here, maybe?
Waypoint remind me, is it kind of like tail scale or head scale if you're into the open source version? Is that sort of how Waypoint was? I never really used it.
Oh,
so.
no. So here's the thing. Waypoint was kind of trying to invent a category, if you will. It wasn't quite CI and it wasn't quite just the dedicated CD tool. You could it allowed you to define the steps to build and deploy your application, but then it could also host your application in terms of being like a pass. So you could host a Waypoint service somewhere and then push commits, and then Waypoints would automatically run it, or you can run Waypoint locally, and then you have local preview environments. And it declaratively allowed you to express all of that in a file that was in HCL that looked kind of like that big file.
Yeah. It's kind of like what's that thing for Ruby? Capistrano. Like where you would tell it to like spin up a server and deploy something to it and do a bunch of other commands. It's like the modern day version of that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think this was like one of the last passion projects started maybe by Mitchell at HashiCorp and then handed off to another team as he transitioned to, to other roles and ultimately to exit. And yeah, it didn't, I think it needed its creator to fully see it through.
I'm sorry, I was thinking of Boundary.
Oh, Boundary. Yeah, Boundary was the tail scale alternative. anyways, wasn't able to quickly find an example of it, and it's not that important. All right, any other announcements, questions that we can get to?
Well, if nobody's going to
Yes,
jump on, I've got a random question, but related to the topic, I guess. So I started a podcast a while back, maybe about a month ago, and we my co-host and I, Angela Andrews, if you ever listen to the Compiler podcast by Red Hat, she's one of the co-hosts for that podcast. And in our podcast, we review, or our goal is to review tech books, and we're wrapping up the DevOps handbook by Gene Kim and et al., a whole bunch of other folks. And we're actually looking for our next book to review. And I'm trying to find a book that covers, something current, cloud, AI, DevOps, whatever the case is, but has some good exercises in it or examples that we can like work out in a live session. Like if we read the book, learn the concept, and then they propose some challenge or something, and we work to solve the challenge in a live stream. That's kind of what we're looking for. So if you have any ideas for a book like that, or perhaps if you've written one, anybody on this stream or might be listening to this down the road, I'd be glad to hear from you as well.
Did you see the post somebody posted in sweetops asking if they had like a bunch of title suggestions, and would any of these books interest you if I wrote it?
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. It was I think it was in the general channel maybe. Yeah, I'll tag you in it. It was from Jason.
And it looks like Zach asked a question, what's the new podcast name? It's From Cover to Code. And so the concept is, cover to cover, but it's cover to the code. And we don't have a website, but yeah, you can find us on YouTube. No, yeah, that'll be the first episode there.
Cool.
But yeah, if you go to the account, yeah, right next to the subscribe button, and go ahead and click that subscribe while you're there. A little self promotion if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can
Sure.
find our stuff there.
You forgot to tell them to like it too. Like and subscribe.
And you know what? I don't do that because I get tired of hearing that myself. So I don't do that. But yeah, I know
forget
that's
the bell.
Yeah, right.
So let's see where you said go to.
Yeah, if you click that link, you'll see all the stuff there. Yeah, I haven't done a website or anything like that, so we're really just kind of getting things started right now.
You skipped over the Phoenix project as the
yeah, because our whole point is not whole point. It could be
practical.
anything. Yeah, something that's a little more hands-on.
Yeah.
Is kind of the idea.
Interesting. Did they lift? I remember having to get all my friends together to get 100 subscribers or 200 subscribers. I forget what it was before I could claim any name. But you were able to claim this early now at 30 subscribers?
Yeah. I was even like coming in with 0. I was able to set it. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I couldn't do that before.
Yeah, same here. I also claimed with 0 subscribers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had to reach out for help to get Cloud Posse.
Oh, wow.
That was a few years ago. Oh.
Yeah, I think when they got rid of the /C thing in the middle of that you had to go to like /C
got
for
rid
channel.
of that? I didn't know they got.
Yeah, so now you can just go to like youtube.com/cover to code. So now the you can like any available thing, you can just sign up and give it and take it as a channel.
I was just checking if we still had the C in our.
No, I think I told you about it when it happened that you didn't need the C anymore. And But I think the new ones have to have an @ in it. I don't think they can have a channel with no thing anymore. Or there's, I think, unless I misunderstood.
That could be. Hey, Rishabh.
Hello. I had a question about Terraform tooling suggestion, and I figured this is probably the best place to ask. As it happens, I kind of came onto a team which has a few different layers of Terraform. That's always not a great start, but in effect, they wanted to limit blast radius, so they did their IAM resources in one stack. They did their RDS in one stack. And all in all, they all interoperate with each other. They have Terraform state calls to each other. Realistically, the whole thing should be one big state file. And instead, it's now split over 4 different state files, which makes life a lot harder, not least of which, when it comes to planning and applying, we have to go through each and every layer in the same order. Pretty sucky thing. What I'm what I've adopted to try and do is merge the 4 layers together, and it's very much a case of lift and shift. Pull a state file, grab all the IDs, the ARNs, whatever I can, and then generate out import blocks in the next layer, and repeat that for each layer until you're done. At the moment, I'm just using a little bit of AI help here and there to help build out and analyze the state files and build out the import blocks, but realistically, they're not that great. When they do build out the import blocks, they don't always take for each into account, they don't always take counts into account, and sometimes, because the way Terraform is, ARNs aren't the only identifiers. Sometimes it's a mixture of ARNs, sometimes it's a mixture of a static name with a unique ID. So all in all, do you happen to know or aware of any kind of tooling which helps with scanning or analyzing a Terraform state file, pulling out the relevant IDs, so that we can then use it to generate out import blocks somewhere else?
So there's the question at hand directly. And there's this thing, what is it? xyproblem.info. So just taking one step back before directly answering the question as proposed, was questioning one of the initial assertions to begin with, that all of this should just be in one root module, and it would be a lot easier if that were the case. So we kind of brushed over what those individual pieces were doing, and there are definitely wrong ways to decompose a larger Terraform architecture in ways that are just cumbersome for the sake of being cumbersome, basically. And there are reasons to combine it all. I just wasn't sure that I heard the right reason to combine it before going through that endeavor.
That's super valid. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it is, but here's the I'll run through the facts. Say, for example, the first layer is just initializing a whole bunch of IAM resources, things like tasks, policies. Cool, perfect, fine. Notice there's no modules. It is just raw IAM resources being written out, which is already, for me, a bit of a bad sign. And then repeat this, and the second layer is purely for making Postgres databases. Not using modules, it's just raw Terraform building out these things. And that's kind of why it smells at, yeah, obviously the team didn't have kind of a dedicated person to help them at the outset, but now that we're here, we want to at least patch things up.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, at a minimum, it sounds like there is definite refactoring to be done. Now the question is, though, well, depending on who's going to manage it and what your tools are to manage it, you're going to gravitate towards one solution or another. And if you're going to only stick with vanilla Terraform, then the tool will be Terraform, and everything will probably become, focused in one root module, maybe, or so forth. This is obviously, you made the mistake of joining our office hours, and this is Cloud Posse, and we have a pretty opinionated approach to these things, so I'd be remiss if I didn't stick my nose out and call it out. So we would think about things in terms of layers, but we think of the layers slightly differently. And it also depends on the scale of the infrastructure. And if this is just a small upstart, yeah, you don't need to overthink it right now. But if they have grander, loftier ambitions, and this is going to be a more robust architecture relying governance and isolation and separation of components, we like to separate things by layers or life cycles. And for example, decoupling the network layer from the platform layer, decoupling the platform layer from the data layer, decoupling, the data layer and platform layer from the application layer. You could stick all of that into one root module, and that's what many companies do. But we just consider it not a long-term scalable approach, just a quick way to get things up for now that you'll pay for later.
Gotcha. And out of interest, in that case, if you do have those kind of separate isolated layers to, I imagine, make it a lot easier to manage and orchestrate longer term, how do you do planning in between things like that? Do the layers interoperate with each other? For example, does the platform layer rely on something from the permissions, or are they completely separate altogether?
Yeah, exactly. So the way we think about it is breaking things down into smaller components, and those components themselves have a lot of resources. So and I'm writing a big blog post on this. It's taken me a few weeks and I'm still not done with it, but there's been a lot of conversations, in the Terraform community, but especially lately on Terralits. And my assertion is, it's not a question about like if you should break things up. It's always just a question about when you should break things up. There will be a practical point where things have to be broken up. It's just when do you want to pay the tax for doing that? So in our GitHub organization, Terraform, Cloud Posse Terraform components, here are 185, I think, or 168 components. That is how we think you should break it up. Those things typically have different life cycles. Is it a general statement? There will be exceptions. There are times when you probably want to combine a couple of these components into one component. But we've managed for the past, 10 years, last 5 years seriously working in this direction, where this is how we break out that architecture or the infrastructure into these pieces. So you asked a question, well, how do they get information passed between each other? And there's many ways of doing it. One way is like the way you described that they're doing in this code that you're kind of replacing. And we are doing that actually in our code in some places, but we have had a change of heart for that. So the problem with using Terraform data sources with reusable pieces of infrastructure or components is it requires that the other component could have only been really provisioned by that other component or that other root module, that the shape of the outputs has to be the same, and that it makes it very hard to make these different pieces to work well together. So this is why, and I can tell Matt is biting his tongue here. We've been working on with Atmos, for example, for the past few months, is doing that in Atmos itself. I'm going to just tease this functionality here in a second, just to introduce it. But in Atmos, you can retrieve that data from many different locations, and Atmos is managing that configuration of all those different components. And each one has its own state. Each one is decoupled. Each one can be managed independently, deployed independently. And it works really well with GitOps. It works really well with governance. You can have different teams own different parts of the infrastructure that get deployed totally separately. I'm on the platform team. I'm managing the EKS cluster. I can manage everything related to EKS in the platform and deploy that without having any permission to do anything with the network layer or the network components, because those are deployed and managed separately. And when you combine all of that into a single Terralithic root module, you get into this area where you have to do policy enforcement and other things that are really complicated. Just like managing IAM is really complicated. What we want to do is have simple ways to do IAM. And that's why using a lot of different accounts is a convenient way of keeping IAM simple. Using a lot of different root modules is a way to keep Terraform IAC policy simple. But when you tie it all together, it's a mess.
And sorry, just one other thing I would add to that would be that once you start layering things in your Terraform on top of things like RDS and EKS and all of that, and that means that your single root module is going to grow exponentially in the amount of time it takes to plan and apply it. And if anything is kind of wrong anywhere or has a problem, you risk like destroying clusters and destroying data and all of those kinds of things where you're now trying to apply something that's like 3 or 4 layers above the data, like your application or a load balancer or something like that, but you accidentally set the flag in that root module to disabled or something like that, and that literally destroys all of the infrastructure like all the way down the tree, and you didn't realize that. I mean, obviously you can catch it in a plan, but there are lots of reasons that you don't want to do that, not the least of which is like planning time becomes a planning and apply time becomes a real thing and a real bottleneck. I've seen a couple of customers that I've worked with that had that approach where a single Terraform apply takes like 2 or 3 hours to do if they don't do targeted applies, and then targeted applies start becoming really nasty with whether or not you've actually deployed everything that you expected to deploy, and you short circuit all the dependency stuff inside of that Terraform root module when you target apply only certain things. So it gets really complicated as your infrastructure grows. So I wouldn't recommend going down that path unless something is absolutely forcing you there.
Fair, very fair. The 2-hour times, oof, just hearing that.
25 gigs of RAM to just run the plan file. Recent experience.
Yeah. Or you set the maximum timeout of your Terraform apply, because like by default it's 10 minutes. So now you set it to like 30 minutes because it's crept up over time to 30 minutes. And then the first couple of times you do that, you're now at 35 minutes. So your Terraform just stops in the middle of applying because it timed out, and you've done that thing. So then you're constantly trying to manage that and see, what's happening. So it's just not something you don't want to get into bigger and bigger root modules. Real bad anti-pattern in my opinion.
Fair. We've just been reaching that 5-minute mark, and already we're reaching for things like parallelism, bumping it up from 10 to 50 or something, and realized, oh wait, AWS has their own rate limiting. They don't want us to.
Yeah, so that was going to be the next statement. And imagine when you get to the point where it's not just you're already at parallelism 1 and it's already taking so long, and then what do you do? Like now you're really up a creek without a paddle. So that's why it's always a question. It's not a matter of if, it's just when. And will you ever reach that point? Maybe not. And then you can make the business trade-offs accordingly. But as a general recommendation for like enterprise grade Terraform, we don't recommend it.
Fair. That makes sense, I think. Thank you. Appreciate it.
What was I going to say? Yeah, so that is the use case for Atmos, basically. Like, if you agree with everything we've said here, then it's worth at some point taking a look at Atmos, because that's the problem we decided to solve. Because when the problem solution cycle is constantly like, with every problem you solve, you're operating at a higher order of efficiency, but also complexity, and then you have a new set of problems to solve. So Atmos solves the problem of, well, I agree that we shouldn't have everything in one Terraform state file. I agree that we should decompose our architecture into smaller pieces. Okay, that's easy to do. how do you pass now information between it? How do you do drift detection? How do you do plans and applies? All of that stuff.
Yeah, and just making it much more like even driving the point home a little bit more. And the most simple way is I often make the analogy like if you're a software developer, you don't open up like, a new Go program and like, main.go and open up the main function and then write 5,000 lines of code in the main function. That's like a really bad idea. You decouple or decompose all of your logic down into much smaller functions that are easier to understand, that can be refactored separately, that can be tested separately, all of those things. And I think the same thing applies with infrastructure as code. Like it doesn't make sense to just have like one giant main, on there. You should really have a bunch of other smaller functions.
But Matt, the counter argument then is like, well, I use modules, so I'm already doing that, right? So I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Sort of. Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of like, it's that service that it's the growth trajectory of any like startup that reaches the inflection point of scale and realizes that they can't continue growing both their team and the product with a single monolithic service running. And then they realize, okay, I got to take that service, I got to decompose it into its parts. Then it's like, what makes sense to break out? And then there are a bunch of strategies for that. Hey, Sam, I see you have your hand up.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for this office hour. I'd like to say I'm a fan of your show, not your show, but the product itself. I've been a long-time listener. My question is, since you're talking about the store, which is something I'm quite interested in, is there a way we should be careful how we store stuff? Because I know there's a hook you can send your outputs to. I just didn't want to end up like dumping everything in there without repercussion of it will become garbage and hard to find things.
Yeah, it's a very timely question. I think what you asked is slightly different than the way I was about to answer and address, but it is also a really valid question. Let's take a step back and just reiterate some of the points you brought up. So with the store functionality, there's this concept of hooks. Hooks are things that you configure on your stacks to selectively record things you want to store for other things to use. So by default, like Terraform outputs are also selective, right? You select what you want to be a Terraform output. The store functionality is even more selective. Let's say what from the output do you actually want to like make public to other things in your infrastructure. And this is similar to when you think about object-oriented languages where you have public methods, right? And where you can allow other classes to call functions inside of yours. So this is basically a way of doing that in an object-oriented decentralized cloud way where you can do that. Now, the question still exists that you brought up. How do you garbage collect that, if you will? Over time, there will be things in the store that may not be updated anymore because you remove the hook that wrote it there. It's a complicated question because it's kind of like garbage collection in general because, well, you can only collect it once all the references to it are gone. But the idea with the store functionality is this is what gives you interoperability with other systems. Like if you're deploying things with CDK, they can use the same store. If you're deploying things with the serverless framework or in Pulumi or things like that, the store is a generalized interface that's pluggable. So you can write to Redis, you can write to SSM. We have PRs open for GCP store. I forget.
GCP got merged. It's Global Secret, Google Secrets Manager.
Oh, that must have happened like today then or yesterday. I think
it was yesterday. I merged it.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So we just added support for that.
Should be in the docs if you look in if you
Did
look
you
in.
did you add the admonition for it, or I said I was going to do it, but I was,
No, I didn't do that. I was waiting for you to give the language. So
and that is a perfect segue to the next thing I was going to say. So what do you stick in the store? Well, one of the things I don't think that we express enough, and that what we were talking about on Friday internally at Cloud Posse was we should really add a bigger warning that we didn't design this at this time to be for secrets. You could store secrets in it, but we don't recommend it because we have log statements that will potentially emit those. And if you have your log level set to something like debug, then those could be leaked. In Atmos, we generate var files, and those var files could contain the secrets and be leaked on disk if you weren't expecting it. So all of that said, use the store functionality for storing things that you would safely output in Terraform outputs and not be afraid of being exposed. So not database passwords, not API tokens, not sensitive webhook URLs that entitle certain capabilities, but perfect for VPC IDs, subnet CIDRs, bucket names, IAM roles that you need to assume, anything like that, things that are dynamic in nature that other things might benefit from. And I wouldn't do it, what's the word? And we should have a best practices probably page on this, Matt, but I wouldn't do it for I wouldn't do it in a premeditated way, if that, I don't know what the word I'm thinking. Don't do it because you anticipate something will need it. Do it because something actually needs it.
Yagni.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to correct myself. I'm an idiot. I forgot that I unmerged it because there was a broken test. So we didn't, we ended up not merging Google Secret Manager yet. So coming very soon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you literally revert it, or you?
I stopped it from merging because I thought I've completely forgot that that's what happened. I thought it went through. My brain was too many things going on.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So just now you were articulating about how Atmos was built, components put together, and then somewhere along the way you mentioned the company had a change of heart and moved towards the direction, and then you mentioned store. Is it you are moving away from using the remote state module? Is that
Yeah. Reading between the lines, yes.
Okay. So as a new person who is onboarding this Atmos, I should start to steer away from not using remote module?
So it's a good question, and let me answer it as best I can. So we have this page sharing data between components, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. There's this template function, there's the store function, there's a Terraform output function. There's our data sources module here, reading Terraform remote state. And it's hard to do generalizations, right? That apply to everyone. And I'd like to say that using Terraform remote state, I think made sense knowing what we knew at the time. And I think the trajectory of thinking at the time in Terraform as a community that you shouldn't have to hard code a bunch of values. You should get those values dynamically. The question is, do you use a data source to list the VPCs by tag, or do you use a data source to retrieve the Terraform output of another component? And that we can argue that until the cows come home. Now, knowing what we know at Cloud Posse and what we're trying to do with our Terraform module and Terraform component ecosystem, I think there's a better understanding. So let me talk about the problems of doing it the way that the lessons that we've learned doing it that way, and why we don't want to do it that way anymore. So the reason we ended up in this solution, first of all, at Cloud Posse is all we do are greenfield engagements. And that's a great trade-off. We don't need to think about how is this going to work in this company when they manage things this way? How are we going to do things over here when we don't allow X, Y, Z? We don't have any of those constraints. We are working from a greenfield environment, so we have the privilege of assuming everything is in a pristine, hermetically sealed environment with infrastructure as code. But if you remove that assumption, now we have a lot of problems. Well, if we want to support our components in a brownfield engagement or a brownfield environment, that's when this is a term in reference to urban planning or urban development, where you take a field and I forget the technical term, but you reinvigorate it, if you will, and construct new things on top of that brown field. And in that situation, you have other constraints that you got to be aware of. Maybe another team manages the network. How do you get the VPC ID? Maybe another team manages the accounts. How do I get my account ID? Maybe another team manages IAM, or another team manages the platform, or another. This happens all the time in enterprise. And when you have a lot of teams responsible for different parts that are in totally different systems, maybe some have been provisioned years ago, now you have to take that into account. And if you use remote state, you're assuming everything is cookie cutter, vanilla, clean, and beautiful. And that's the problem we have using remote state. We want to support brownfield where those values could come from the user. Matt?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, using remote state also, just even at a higher level, I know you kind of talked about it, but it assumes that all the data you need is in remote state, one.
Yeah.
And two, it also assumes that the permissions context that
Yeah.
you are currently applying your module in also has access to the remote state where that other thing exists, where you need the data in order to do that. So that often is not the case, in there.
Well,
so, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you brought that up. So this is something that has never been the case for us, but turns out is often not the case for everyone else. And that means that it is a problem. So Matt brings up a really good point. This was one of the chief reasons we introduced the store functionality, is that you might want to have outputs, but you don't have access to the Terraform state. And for good reason, the Terraform state might have privileged information. So to Matt's point, this store functionality is what breaks that barrier and allows you to publicly export information in a selective way that other pieces can read from, while not exposing your Terraform state, which is sometimes sensitive and was in this situation. You might have an IAM role that only gives you access to the state in production, or only the state in dev, or only the state in staging. But if you're doing things that cross that boundary, that permissions boundary, you need another way. And the store functionality also accommodates that use case by providing another vector, basically, to retrieve outputs.
Yeah, and then in the example of like the enterprise that we're working with, that sort of drove a lot of this, they have things like white lists of CIDR blocks, like IP CIDR blocks that should be allowed to access things. And some of them are like on-prem, some of them are managed by third parties, some of them are in different clouds, some of them are VPN connections, etc. So they maintain that list like manually. So now they can just like publish that list as like to the store in a known location, and then everything that needs like all of those CIDR blocks can just read from the store to get those pieces of data out. So like the VPC rules in the dev subnet can just read that all. They don't need to have connections to all of those subnets to figure out what their what their CIDR blocks are, as an example. So It's really useful to decouple all that stuff.
All right. Well, thanks for those questions, Sam. Hope we provided some clarity on that. Definitely feel free to join us next week and ask any more questions like that. We love those. I saw there was some other chatter in the Zoom chat there, a new cursor competitor, Tray AI. Got to check that out. We'll bring that up next week and discuss. We are at time for today, so I want to be mindful of everyone's busy schedule. Please, if you haven't already, subscribed to our channel. Like and subscribe. Go to youtube.com/cloudposse. And then if you are interested in seeing how we can move the needle at your organization with Terraform, you can book a meeting with me directly at cloudposse.com/meet. And then here are some links if you want to get more engaged in our community. We have a Slack team that's public. We have a newsletter. We have our podcast and our YouTube channel. So see y'all next week, same time. Take care.